Welcome to Guy Shrink. I'm Bill Roman, host here on the podcast that talks about what keeps a guy up awake at night. And we're in the beautiful studios of Cogito Studios in Toledo, Ohio at the Glass City. And my guest today is Matthew Kutz. Matt is a professor at Florida International University. Good place to be.
Great place to be.
Great place to be, yeah, especially in March in Toledo. And was a professor, associate professor at Bowling Green State University for, 15 years or so.
Yep. And
now he's presently a professor down there in Florida. He tells me he's working, but my hunch is that he's mostly at the beach doing some kind of work. But he's a professor of athletic training.
Somebody's got to work at the beach too. I mean...
So, Matt, it's delightful to have you here today. And so I ask every guest as we get started, what keeps you as a guy awake at night?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, a lot of things run through my mind. But, ultimately, what I'm passionate about and what I spend my time thinking about, and that legal pad next to my bed, which I literally have, and right, it really comes down to this idea of why it is or how it is that so many people aren't aware of their environment that they're in and how they just go through life automatically like automatons, just in not really taking in all the information that's available to them to help them make better decisions.
Do you think it's just overwhelming? I'm just too overwhelmed, and so I don't want to think about anything?
I think it's two things. I think one is definitely the volume of information that needs to be taken in. The other thing is just the nature of the routine. We fall into our practices, we fall into our modes, and we just continue to try to make things happen like they always have been. And we fail to recognize that the environment around us, the context, or something that I call the context, is shifting and moving. And we use everything and view everything from an internal frame instead of an external frame. And I think we need to do both.
Okay, I've noticed that, you have this book out called Contextual Intelligence. Could you tell me a little bit about what that's about?
Yeah, so the book is again, this idea of what keeps me up at night. And I just wanted to offer some insights. And it's research-based and evidence-based. And I've done a lot of research over the years on this idea of contextual intelligence, which is exactly what I'm describing. It's a skill set that you can develop in certain behaviors that you can practice that help you pay attention to everything that's going on around you so that you can make more informed decisions. I think a lot of people really are just going with hunches or guessing or just trying their best. And I do believe people are doing their best, so I'm not saying that they're not, but I think that there's things that we can do to make better decisions, to have more information, to really help, to really get to where we want to be. Because I find that a lot of people aren't living the life that they dream of living, that they want to live. They're not making the impact. And I don't just mean, personal joy and things like that, happiness and all those things. It's that plus the things that you want for the people around you. I mean, most people, I believe, they want to be a great employee. They want to be someone who adds value to their community. They want to be someone who gives back to their families and provides opportunities for the people around them. And I think so many people look back at the end of it all and they realize I could have did it better. And so what I'm about and what I try to do in my research and my talking and my writing, I try to get people to develop the skill sets that keeps them present. Because really, contextual intelligence is about being present. I use this model that I call 3D thinking, which is really integrating hindsight, insight, and foresight together to help us see what's really going on around us. So it really requires stepping back and taking in a larger purview, a larger angle lens, so to speak, a wide angle lens to how we're living our life, the decisions we're making, why we're making those decisions, etc. And I think once we learn some of those skills, we can actually begin to see more than we've ever seen before. And then my assumption is when we see more than we've ever seen before and then learn how to process it, because that's also important. Once we learn how to process what we're seeing, now I can make a better decision. Maybe not the best decision that could be made, but certainly a better decision.
So you're kind of taking the fun out of ready, fire, aim.
Exactly. Exactly.
Is what you're doing. The fun, I say that facetiously, of course. Actually giving people an action plan. So look, let's break that down a little bit. I'm intrigued by what you call the hindsight, insight, and foresight.
Yeah.
When you talk about hindsight, what are the things you bring to the table in that part of your model?
Yeah. So the 3D thinking framework, most people think about the past. So hindsight is really the past, right?
Okay.
It's the experiences that we have. I call them the memories, So we all have memories that we learned lessons from throughout, whatever it might be in any particular area, whether it's you learned it in Sunday school, you learned it from grandma, you learned it wherever you did your first job, whatever it was. We have memories that taught us lessons. And what we do is we often use those memories incorrectly or recall them inaccurately. And it's called hindsight bias, So a big part of this hindsight piece is coming to terms with and recognizing our own hindsight bias. So hindsight bias is when we misremember the past in our favor. And it's kind of like we always put ourselves as the central character in every memory we have, right? And that's normal, that's natural, everybody does that. What I'm asking you to do and what this 3D thinking process is about, and hindsight in particular, is one, acknowledging the fact that however I'm remembering this, it's not exactly the way it really went down. So admitting that and confessing that, and actually, saying it out loud. It kind of even sounds funny when I say it out loud myself, and I have to constantly remind myself to do that. But by doing that, then if you're intentional about it, then it forces you to ask more questions about what actually did happen.
Okay.
So that involves two things. One, kind of critiquing and analyzing your own memory of the event, and then inviting other people in who also shared in that experience and asking them their recollection of the same thing, and then putting the pieces together to get a more accurate story. I have two sons who are grown now, but many times anybody who has raised kids or been around kids, you don't even have to raise kids, been around kids, and you come home and something's amiss, and you ask one what happened and you ask the other what happened, you get two completely different stories, even though they were both there, both, same experience, same thing. And that's kind of what happens with us in our memories, right? We experience these things and we learn lessons and we chalk up the lesson to it. And we kind of believe that the lesson that we learned is the only reason why that thing happened. And I believe that the experiences and the memories that we have can actually teach us multiple things. So it's revisiting those things, going back to those things. But again, you need the help of other people to help you see that more clearly. So that's kind of step one in that hindsight aspect, in that 3D thinking, because most people actually, when you ask them, and the reason why this even came about is even some of my own research, when I would ask people about different experiences they've had, they would recall them and they would remember just something that I never remembered, and something that I never saw. And I would begin to question them about different experiences, different opportunities that they've had. I'm thinking of my students in particular, after they've graduated and come back and I run it and we do alumni interviews and things like that, and collecting these data for the alumni in our program, I begin to realize that what they saw happen and recognize happen is not at all what I recall or remember. And there's something neat about that, that made me change some of my behavior, that made them appreciate things differently. And we walk away from experiences like that, better because of that.
Sure.
And I think that's a big part of it.
Sure. That reminds me of my work with couples. There's always two versions of an incident, and I try to work with, there's no such things as a facts here. If I can help you move towards understanding the other person's position, that goes a long way, at least in couples work. But you're also reminding me of the cognitive behavioral therapy about reframing, and the importance that when I reframe something, I see it from a different angle, and that I might not have considered that previously, and that new consideration might help me move forward in a different direction than I would have with the biases that I've already had.
And that's a big part of what I talk about even in my book is this important part of understanding hindsight is reframing your experiences. Now, I have no background in therapy of any kind or counseling. So from a leadership perspective, though, I understand that this idea of reframing is critically important for just seeing what's in front of me. And so I use the term reframing to describe, you see a picture, a memory, you have a frame around it, the context that's around it, all the things that went into it. What is it that made that picture look like that for you? And what is it that makes that picture look like that for someone else? And when you can get them talking about that, they both come away seeing a different picture than they saw before. And that, I think, is a big value, especially when we're trying to make decisions about things and evaluate probabilities, evaluate opportunities that people have. I think that's huge. So, and that's just one part, because the other thing that I think is important to recognize here, when I would ask these students this question, they would only ever use their hindsight or their past as evidence for what to do in the future or the present. And that was intriguing to me as well, as I realized that most people, when asked, well, what do you want to do or what should you do, or they're evaluating an opportunity about something, they would go back to the past and they would only use information from their past.
Selective memory.
Decision. Exactly right. And I'm thinking, yeah, but you just told me that your long-term goal was this other thing. So what is it about? Don't you ever think about what you want to do when you're making decisions about what to do today, and how this decision may or may not position you to be where you want to be tomorrow? And most people say no to that, at least in my experience, because we so overemphasize the value of experience. Now, I'm a proponent of valuing experience, but I think we way overvalue experience. And that becomes important in the world we live in today, which is of what I call, other people have called a VUCA world, VUCA. If you don't know what that is, it stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. It's a Army War College coined that term several years ago. And the VUCA world is the world that's constantly in a state of turbulence and chaotic and uncertain, unpredictable.
Yeah, there's a philosophical theorem that says that experience cannot be the final criterion of truth.
That's absolutely right. That's brilliant. I got to write that down, because that's exactly true. And what we do in a world like this turbulent world that we're in now, if experience is all you ever use, you're never going to come to the right conclusion, because theoretically, or in a turbulent world, the problems that we're facing are brand new problems.
Yes,
they've never been faced before.
Absolutely, and that's another whole ball game.
Right.
I'm over my head. I'm in over my head.
Yeah, I mean, so when you're faced, and here's what we do as humans, it's our nature to go to our experience to inform how we view something. And if you're looking at something that's brand new and never been seen before, then you have no experience in that area, and no one else does either, because by definition, it's brand new. So how do we work in that kind of a context? Well, you've got to now call on some other dimensional realities of time and the present and the future. So you have to, 3D thinking is ultimately about using your hindsight simultaneously or in conjunction with your insight, which is what you're seeing in the present, and foresight, which is what you're seeing in the future. So for me, and for my model here in the contextual intelligence model, this idea of making better decisions includes equal parts or equal input from all three of those dimensions of time, past, present, and future, which, like we said, hindsight, insight, and foresight. So getting people to recognize that there are two other aspects of time that you need to consider in your relationships or in your opportunities is a huge light bulb moment for so many people. And so I've done research on this for several years now, and I've got literally thousands of data points on practice behaviors and frequencies of practice and different things like that. And what we're seeing and realizing is the second you can get people to start to look at that 3D picture, they actually do begin to see more and recognize more than they did before. And it also really, really helps them understand the other perspective that they may not have considered. And in fact, it just dawned on me, I just remembered, the very first time, which I think this was in 2008, that I gave a talk on contextual intelligence. I was just kind of, muddling around with the concept.
Is this when you kind of
idea.
Invented the term?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm giving this talk to this. It's a Fortune 500 company, a rather large multinational corporation, and one of the executives was walking me to my car after the session was over, and he was shaking his head. And he says, "Man, Matt," he goes, "that was really good." He goes, "I know it was all leadership and business stuff, but all I kept thinking while you were talking is, had I known this stuff 7 years ago, I wouldn't be divorced right now."
Wow.
And that's exactly what I did. I said, wow. And that's the first time I begin to think, oh, maybe I'm onto something here. Maybe this is something. So then I launched into, some research on it and different things. And now wrote a book since then and all that.
Yeah.
But that was really, that in particular was really helpful for me. That's a powerful statement to make, but
Sure
also
is.
it's like, well, maybe there is something to this idea of understanding the bigger picture, because, we, in our culture in particular, one of the things that we do, especially in the leadership world and the business world, is we become myopic and focused. When something, a difficult decision has to be made, when, something we're dealing with or wrestling with, we become myopic. It's our nature and tendency to try to cut everything out. And what I'm saying, and there's value to that. I mean, like I said, I know there's value to that, but I wonder if there's also value, or maybe even more value, in those times stepping back and trying to take in more information and see the big picture instead of narrowing down and focusing down on this thing here. And that's really, really kind of what contextual intelligence is in the subtext underneath. It's really about backing off, slowing down enough, backing off, and taking in some of the bigger picture, and recognizing that, I'm not only a product of everything that I've done in the past. I believe that we're also in part a product of this thing called destiny or purpose, something I'm meant to do, something I'm supposed to do. There's an ambition and an initiative that I have. I want to be this other thing, or I want to have this impact. I want to have this influence. I want to be a great husband. I want to be a great father. I want to be a great, employee. And I might not be right now, or I might not be as good as I want to be. So I use the past to help me inform those, but I also need to look out there into the future to help me decide what to do today to get there.
Yeah, otherwise I become very myopic in my world,
Yeah, exactly.
As you were talking, I was thinking about Andrew Solomon, written a couple of things. He wrote The Noonday Demon, which is a book about depression, but he also wrote an essay many years ago regarding Adam Lanza. That's the kid that did all the killing. Okay. Killed those 21 school kids, Yep. And he made in this, and I believe this was in the Atlantic several years ago, and he makes this statement that diagnosis is an impediment to insight. That once I got you figured out diagnostically, I don't need to look any further.
Yeah.
I got the whole, and I think that's kind of what you're saying here. With hindsight, I get stuck in one place, and my view is parked there, and I don't consider any other factors that might play into what's happening.
That is exactly what I'm saying. And I've never heard that before. That's amazing. I'm writing it down here because that's what hindsight bias does. It's this idea of, it goes back to what I was saying a moment ago of, when I have this memory of this lesson that I learned from this experience, and now that I've learned my lesson, or at least wrote it down and know it, then that served its point, and I no longer need to go back and visit that because, well, now that I know, but no, I'm saying you need to go back. There's more there than you recognize. And then once you see that, it just broadens your perspective dramatically. And we can't be that myopic. The people around us deserve better. We deserve better because listen, all of us want to make better decisions. We all want to make the impact that we dream about making. Even if we don't say it to someone else, even if we don't believe we're capable of it, we still think that we have these dreams and fantasies about wanting to be there. And this can actually help you do that when we start understanding this nature of how we even store information. I mean, one of the things, exercises that I like to do with people when I'm in workshop scenarios and trainings is I call it 3D thinking free fall. And what we do is I ask the question and I say, okay, where were you at and what were you doing when you had, a brilliant idea or what, creative idea or something like that. And so I go around the room and I literally have asked this question to thousands of people in about 17 different countries over the years. And I get the same answers every time without fail. Doesn't matter the group, doesn't matter the country, doesn't matter the gender of the audience. And I get the same answers. And it's funny. Things like I'm in the shower or go in the bathroom or I'm on a run or a walk or nodding off to sleep. I get those same 5 answers every time. And I write about this in the book. And it dawned on me that no one has ever said to me, not even an outlier, not even one in like thousands have they said at work.
What's that say about working
exactly
in creative thinking?
Exactly. When no one has ever said that. And it's kind of funny to me. And you ask, it's like, okay, so that leads, like any researcher, they're going to think questions just propagate more questions. So I'm like, all right, so if you're in these places when these great ideas strike, what are you thinking about, kind of thing. And the answer I normally get is nothing. I'm not thinking about anything. And I know that's not right. So I'm like, well, no, you can't, you're not thinking about nothing. You're thinking about something. And I asked the question, I said, well, is it more like this, where you're thinking about, what you needed? It starts with some random thought. Well, what I need to do, I need to pick up the dry cleaning tomorrow, right? And then the dry cleaning reminds you of the stain on the shirt that you took it in for. And then that reminds you of the hot dog you ate that dropped the mustard on the shirt. And then that hot dog you ate reminds you of a picnic you had when you were 12 years old, a very fond memory of some Labor Day picnic that you had. And you're thinking about that. And then you're thinking about, the lake that the picnic was at and how much you love going to the lake. And boy, I promised my wife last week I'd take her to the lake, and boy, I never did that. And she might have, and you start thinking about vacations. You start thinking about your own kids and the memories you make. And and they're like, yeah, that's what I'm thinking about. So it's really I'm not thinking about nothing. I'm thinking about everything.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about that is in that process of explaining what they're thinking about, and then people really light up because they're like, that's exactly what's happening in my mind. I'm all over the place. And I'm not thinking about one thing in particular. I'm everywhere. And what they realize is they're thinking in the past, they're thinking in the present, and they're thinking in the future. They're thinking all 3 time orientations are integrated together.
So they're able to do it. They just didn't know they were doing it.
Exactly right. So they're thinking, so the laundry is something I have to do right now. It's immediate, the traffic, all those things that are involved with that. And the memories from the hot dog and the vacations and that. And then they're thinking about, well, next year's vacation, I want to make sure I go late. So they're thinking past, present, and future. And they're falling, as I call it 3D thinking, free fall, right? They're free falling through the folders in their brain that they've organized in past, present, and future. And they're falling through these memories. And they're all of a sudden, they're able to pull data, if you will, from all the folders that are open simultaneously. Mm-hmm. Whereas what happens when you're at work, you're tasked with a problem. So all you really do is you go open one folder, and that's your work history folder.
Wow.
And you open your work history folder, and you're searching for the answer to the problem or a new creative idea in your work history folder. And it's only one of 1,000 folders in your head that have past, present, and future. And that's why things like brainstorming sessions and blue sky sessions and blue ocean thinking and all the stuff you read about, that's why it works. It's because it creates the environment where I'm opening all my folders, my past folders, my present folders, my future folders, and I'm getting input and data from multiple sources. And anytime we can get more information and more data, we're going to have a richer outcome. You're going to have a richer pool to pick from. And that's kind of what's happening there. And why, by the way, the other interesting thing that happens is when you're in the shower and you have that great idea, you don't have a legal pad nearby to write it down. So you think it's so profound and so brilliant. You tell, I'm not going to forget that one. So you're all right. You finish your shower, get out, dry off, get dressed, and you go back to sit down and remember what it was, and it's gone. What was that idea? It was I can't believe I forgot that idea, because now you're back in your folder mode. And we really need to create environments. And that's kind of what contextual intelligence helps us do, is learn some skills, create the environment so that I can pull information from all of these sources, which goes back to what we were talking about earlier with experience. This is why in a VUCA world, experience is less, I don't want to say it's less valuable. It's not less valuable. It's just valued differently, because experience is always important. But 50 years ago, experience was important because I've been there, done that, and I know what to do based on hindsight primarily in past. Whereas experience in the new world, where the problem's never been faced before. So you've got two people, let's say you've got two people on a team trying to solve a problem. One person is a 30-year veteran and one person, just graduated last week and has no experience at all. And they're tasked together to solve this problem. They're looking at the problem and neither one of them's like, what are you looking at? I don't know. What are you looking at? I don't know. I've never seen this. I've never seen this either. So the issue is, in that situation, experience is more likely to be a impediment to solving it, where the novice is going to be much more likely and going to be able more easily to see the other folders, so to speak, and open the other folder. So the young person or the inexperienced person might be drawing information from, I don't know, a family vacation they took when he was 12 or when she was 12 to give insight into the moment, where a veteran is likely not going to do that.
Sure. Well, Matt, what do you say we give a little challenge to our hearers here? You talked about having the yellow legal tablet beside your bed, and bed's a good, bedroom's a good place to, dreams and all that kind of stuff. For the next 2 weeks, just put a 3x5 card by your bed and write stuff down if you think about it as in the middle of the night or whatever. Just try it out.
Great idea.
2 weeks, just try it out. Maybe you'll have nothing at the end of 2 weeks. On the other hand, you might have a couple of things.
I'll be willing to bet that they won't have nothing. They'll have something there. And,
just for 2 weeks. I call it behavioral experiment. Try it out for 2 weeks and see what happens. And you're right, because you don't have a notepad in the shower, but finding a place where everybody's got creative ideas. They really do.
We have so many ideas, and again, those creative ideas are lost in those folders. And I don't want to make everything about these folders, but I do think that's a big part of it, because I believe everybody has creative capacity. Everyone has ideas, and certain people, I'm one who would have said and thought for years that, I'm not very creative. And then I talk to other people who are like, well, Dr. Kutz, you're one of the most creative people I know. You've written 5 books and working on a 6th one, and you're an entrepreneur. You do your speaking and corporate training, and you come up with these models and these frameworks and these pictures. It's like, really, do you think that's creative? I think creative is dancing and playing the guitar and being artistic. And I can't draw a lick. I can't sing. I can't compose. I don't write poetry. All the things that I think are creative. And it's just, what's interesting is just the broad breadth stroke of what creativity is. So I think we all have it. And I think an exercise like you're just recommending, keep the legal pad by your bed and just write down what happens. There'll be, in the end of 2 weeks, there'll be an idea in there at least.
Yes. So, Matt, what do you think is so important about, you're talking about the 3D thinking. What do you think is so important about this? I know that when we talked a little bit about this before, you talked about a concept called mental immunity.
Yeah.
And that this has a practical application here. Could you say a little bit more about how you conceive mental immunity and anxiety management?
Right. Yeah. So we tell ourselves some crazy stuff. I mean, we tell ourselves some crazy stuff, and the internal dialogue, and I'm speaking just personally from my own experiences. I tell myself some crazy stuff, and the internal dialogue, and what really CI does is it helps you become an observer of your own internal dialogue. And for me, that's incredibly valuable, because one of the things that somebody who practices contextual intelligence does better than others is they can watch themselves in real time. And there's a definition of critical thinking that I love. Critical thinking is thinking about your thinking while you're thinking in order to change your thinking. All right. So that's my students.
You ever think about your thinking?
Yes. I put that on my syllabus in the class, and the students are like, what? Oh my God, that's going to be one of those classes. It's like, all right, so I'll say that again. It's thinking about your thinking while you're thinking in order to change your thinking. And that's
epistemology.
Exactly right. It's totally epistemology. And so this is what CI helps us do. It gives us some tools and some frameworks, what 3D thinking helps us do. It helps us step outside and observe our own internal dialogue. And that, I think, really provides a tremendous amount of mental immunity because you can watch it as it comes in.
Yeah.
It's taking your thoughts captive. There's a verse in the Bible somewhere that talks about, take your thoughts captive. And I think that's kind of what this is. This is an ancient old thing. I mean, people have been doing this, talking about this for a long time, and we don't know how to do it. And this provides an opportunity for that. But I think that's a big part of that mental immunity piece is being able to watch your thoughts as they come in and as they exit, and then just put a little small test to them. Is this right? Is this true? And again, inviting people, part of that 3D thinking thing is, like I said, the hindsight bias. You have to have other people who you trust and who are, who are willing to challenge some of your assumptions and things like that, bounce those ideas off them. And I think that adds a tremendous amount of value, and it helps us actually manage, all the things that are coming in us at 1,000 miles an hour.
Now, Stoicism really talks about that a lot.
Absolutely.
I was laughing as you were talking about thinking. My father was an extremely epistemological oriented guy. Where in the hell do you get your ideas? That's what he would say to me. Where the hell do you get that idea?
Yep, that's crazy.
Well, I think that mental immunity thing is an important thing because we have a lot more control on how we manage our thinking than we think we do.
Here.
We can't prevent the thoughts from entering, but we can sure manage them differently.
Absolutely.
We have lots of choices about that.
And that's one of the things that, again, this context piece I think is really important is understand where you're at, what you're coming from, your frameworks. One of the part that I talk about this quite a bit, and even before we get to the 3D thinking piece, there's what I call 3 meta skills. And in order to behave in a contextually intelligent manner, we have to understand that there are prerequisite skills, or a meta skill is basically a skill from which other skills emerge. Okay. So there are 3 meta skills that the contextually intelligent person has a handle on. And one of those is handling complexity. Embracing complexity is actually a better way to say it, because it's one thing to think the world is complicated. It's another thing to think the world is complex. And now we often interchange those words and use them interchangeably as synonyms, and they're just not. Complexity is something has multiple moving parts or multiple parts, and it's integrated together. And when it's integrated, it becomes something new. So the metaphor I use for complexity is like baking a cake. So cake has tons of ingredients in it, right? It's got flour, sugar, butter, milk, whatever. All the stuff goes into a cake. And you mix it together. And when you mix it together, it becomes cake batter. You put it under an extreme condition like heat, and it comes out a cake. And now all the eggs are in there and the sugar's in there, but you can't get it back out, right? It's like if my wife pulled the cake out of the kitchen or out of the oven, and I said, "Oh, honey, I need 2 eggs." She's like, "Well, I have 2 eggs, but they're in this cake. I can't get those 2 eggs out to use them," right? So that's complexity. Complication is also lots of parts, like a car engine or a watch, for example. There's a lot of parts in there. So you have carburetors and spark plugs and gaskets and all these things, and you put them together and fit them together, and they become an engine. The difference is if I need the gasket, I can get it back unchanged.
Gotcha.
If I need the spark plug, I can pull it out. And it's still the spark plug and it's not altered in any way. And that's the major difference. And how we live life is we tend to live life under the assumption that it's complicated. And we try to solve life's problems by using complicated based strategies. Whereas the reality is life is more like that cake. And you can't solve complex problems with complicated strategies. And so, and coming to terms with that is a huge piece of even practicing contextual intelligence, because we have to understand that complexity is not only here and not only the way it is, but it's actually the way it's supposed to be. It's actually a good thing. So embracing complexity is a huge piece of that, as opposed to resisting complexity or trying to make things simple. And we try to reduce, because you can't reduce complexity down like you can deconstruct an engine. We think, well, I solve complex problems by deconstructing the engine. That doesn't matter. Those metaphors don't mix, because you can't deconstruct a cake. Life is the cake, not the engine.
Yes.
And so, which requires a completely different way of thinking. And that's where 3D thinking, contextual intelligence comes in, because it helps us understand, okay, the world is complex, and that's good. And it's actually not as complicated as I think it is. Not that there's not complicated aspects to life. Of course there are. And by the way, trying to explain this to a group of engineers is real hard.
Oh, good luck.
I've done it. I've tried to do it, and they just, anyways, but that's a different story.
As you're talking, I'm just thinking about my work as a therapist. Most of my training and practice is in family therapy. And so a couple comes in for marital counseling, and then the guy says, Bill, if you fix her, it'll all be okay. It's a complication looking for a complex situation, looking for a complicated answer.
Exactly.
Just fix her,
right,
and it'll be okay.
That's exactly what it is. And I even give a similar example when I'm doing my workshops. I even talk about, for example, this idea of so I identify a problem, and so I need to make more money. My life. I'm not happy with my life, right? So what do I need to do? Well, my strategy, which is a complex thing. In fact, I'm not happy with my life. There's all kinds of factors that influence that.
Right.
But I think of it as a complicated problem. So I said, well, I need a new job. I need a new wife. I need a new this. So I quit my job and get a new one. I get a divorce. I get remarried, and I find out, a year later, I'm still a jerk.
Yeah.
And that was the real issue. I'm still not happy. Yeah. Why? Because you tried to solve a complex situation with a complicated framework or complicated strategies. You just can't unplug and replug things in and think it's going to work. Life's just not like that. So that's the first meta skill. And the reason why that's a meta skill, and again, meta skill is a skill from which other skills emerge. So as a meta skill, the second we begin to embrace complexity for what it really is and the value it really provides, now all of a sudden I see all these other skills that I have that I develop, and I can actually create and develop new skills to help me problem solve. And skills come when I need them. That's the neat thing about this. When I think of complicated, what comes with that is there's a finite number of tools in my toolbox. Right? We use this metaphor a lot. Well, you just need more tools in your toolbox, or learn this or read this, and you can add another tool to your toolbox. That's a complicated based framework, because at some point we run out of tools, or my toolbox can only contain so many tools.
Right.
In a complexity-based model, there is no toolbox. The skills kind of come out of nowhere. It's a difference between finite and infinite games. There's some neat stuff out there. James Karsh wrote a book several years ago on finite and infinite games. Simon Sinek actually wrote another one on it recently, and he credits Karsh with this idea. And what Karsh would say is that infinite games are games that have no ending. Games that there's really not a winner to. It's you don't win the game of life. You don't win marriage. This is what Sinek says, because it's an infinite game. The goal of an infinite game is to keep playing and to go to the next level. And in an infinite game, characters and rules change as you play, right? In a finite game, there's a winner and a loser. There's clearly defined rules. The players who start the game also finish the game, and you can't add players in the middle and things like that. And again, it kind of relates to this, because most of us think of life and anything we're doing as a finite game, and it's really an infinite game. And by embracing the complexity framework, it gives me permission to live and play the infinite game that life really is.
Boy, that just speaks volumes right there, what you just said, because I'm just thinking how that applies to in couples work, particularly in conflict management. Is it conflict resolution, or is it conflict management?
Yeah.
And there's a big difference. Resolution is the complicated. We'll fight till there's a winner.
Right.
And most problems in couples work, at least, is the model of conflict. There's a winner and a loser. How about just seeing as we're going to be fighting forever here on stuff? Why don't we just embrace fighing? Well, I'll call it conflict, but Yeah, I really like what you just
Conflict
said there, man.
has tremendous
Wow.
value. Conflict
Yeah.
has tremendous value. So my wife and I, we've been married 28 years. And, speaking of this is a reality. For matter of fact, most of my anecdotes come from our struggles. And that's exactly it. We actually do some workshops ourselves as couples on, fighting and conflict and how important conflict is. And an Eastern mindset versus a Western mindset, even on conflict. We've been very intentional in our marriage to think about, okay, conflict is a good thing. It helps us see the other perspective. It helps us understand the hindsight bias thing we talked about before. And so we really learned to embrace conflict. We were thrilled to find out years ago that, there's some research out of some labs in, the guy's
Gottman.
name, Gottman.
John
That's what I'm
Gottman.
thinking of.
Gottman.
Yes,
Gottman.
that's exactly what I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
Talks
Brilliant.
about this idea of fighting frequency,
Yeah.
isn't really a quality indicator, which is fantastic because my wife and I love to fight. but we've learned to fight fair.
Yeah.
And we use these techniques also, this idea and this framework really underpins and undergirds our philosophy about
absolutely.
that. Yeah. So
They talk about 31% of most issues in a couple's life are resolvable. What's that say about 69%? I mean, everybody starts going, oh, we're screwed.
Right.
No, it means that they're perpetual, number
That's right.
one. And part of what perpetual means is the model that I have for conflict. So could we embrace another model of move away from resolving to managing? And the other thing is, well, you're doing 31%, is good. What are you doing?
right.
And let's keep that up,
Yeah.
kind of thing. But you're absolutely right. And I think conflict models in industry could be investigated in a different way too.
Oh, for
The
sure.
whole thing, voting is a bad way to make a decision.
Yeah, agreed. Completely agreed. And even the way they do performance evaluations. That's one of the things I recommend when I talk to a lot of people. So how do you do, you want to change the culture of your company here. How do you do annual performance reviews? Well, we just do this. Well, maybe just re-examining that is like, oh my gosh, I never even considered that. And it almost works every time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're here with Matt Kutz, who's talking about contextual intelligence, and he's talking about meta skills, embracing complexity, and we got a couple more to talk about. So, what else you got on your?
Yeah. So the second meta skill that's really important here is this idea of leveraging synchronicity. And I didn't coin the term synchronicity. Carl Jung used that term, and basically when he described it, he means the coincidences that happen in our lives and the meaning we make from those. So, for example, if I'm at work and I have a thought, boy, I should buy my wife flowers today. And what happens when I have that thought, I suppose like most men, when they have that thought, they dismiss it immediately and get on with what they're going to do the rest of the day.
Yeah, right.
I do
right,
the same thing.
right.
It's not for any ladies that are listening, it's not that men don't have that thought. We do. We just don't listen to it. But so anyway, so what my point is, synchronicity is, so I have that thought, buy Angie flowers today, and then I forget about it or dismiss it and go back to my job, right? And just do what I'm doing. And now 8 hours later or however many hours later, I'm driving home and I'm driving down the road and I pull up at the stoplight and I'm waiting at the stoplight and I look out my window, and out my window on the billboard, I see an advertisement for 1-800-Flowers. And I do what everybody does, and they go back to the past, and they remember thinking, boy, early this morning I thought I should buy my wife flowers, and now I'm seeing the sign, and then we have a dilemma, an immediate dilemma. Is it coincidence? You start arguing with yourself. Is this a sign? Do I need to get her flowers?
Right.
Or is it coincidence? And and we all fall on the different scale there on how meaningful that may or may not be. But it happens. It doesn't matter where you fall on if it's a coincidence or no, it's a sign kind of thing. We all recognize that as a convergence or a collision of synchronous events. And then while I'm having that dialogue, internal dialogue, again, remember, we're ultimately watching ourselves in the moment. So thinking about your thinking while you're thinking. So while I'm watching myself have this argument with myself, in the lane next to me pulls the flower delivery truck.
Perfect.
The third sign, so what do I do now? So that's synchronicity. When all of those coincidences converge together, you are now forced to make meaning out of that convergence of those coincidences. What do you do? How do you make meaning of those? What rules are you applying? What heuristics are you using to work through that. That's what synchronicity is. And that's what I mean by leveraging synchronicity. Synchronicity is the convergence itself. The leveraging part is, all right, how am I going to handle this? So we need to go back and ask ourselves now, what are the rules from which I would handle something like that? Now, what's interesting about that is the timing in which those coincidences converge can be in a relatively short space of time, like the example I just gave in the course of, of several hours, or it can be a lifetime. It can be all of a sudden you're driving down the road and something happens and it reminds you of an event that happened when you were 20 years old or 10 years ago or something like that. And now you see the convergence and you have this synchronous event of like, oh, that's what that was about, or that's what so-and-so meant by this, and you have this epiphany, and that's these synchronous events coming on. Now, so what I'm asking you to do, and what the contextually intelligent person does, is they become aware. They're not intuitive. This is not natural. We don't naturally do this, but they're intentional about, okay, noticing when those synchronous events happen is the first step. Once you've noticed it happens, then you've got to kind of back up and examine, all right, what are the rules that I have applied to make me come up with, or that lead me to come up with whatever solution or whatever, however you're going to follow through. Or should I buy I mean, what makes you decide, yes, I'm going to buy the flowers, or no, I'm going to dismiss it. That's silly. You have experiences, you have background. That's where, so that's relates to insight, and it also connects to hindsight. So if you look at these things, and then it also relates to foresight, because then it's like, all right, so I'm either going to buy flowers and something good's going to happen, or I'm not, and whatever. And we start thinking about the future. And so that's leveraging synchronicity and how important that is. The third meta skill is this idea of being awareness of our tacit moments or tacit insight. So to understand that, what that is, so our tacit awareness is basically how aware we are of the rules and heuristics that we live by. So heuristics are the rules of thumb, the kind of that we live by, and based on history, based on experiences, etc. Tacit knowledge is what we know to be true, but have no idea how or where we learned it. Okay. So an example of tacit knowledge is the assumption that we are both making right now that we're speaking English. Okay. We're speaking English because we were told this is English. We just learned it. We don't remember, how we came to learn it. It just was part of how we grew up, as opposed to explicit knowledge. So explicit knowledge are things that can be transferred one person to another. It's what we learn from a lecture. It's what we learn from reading a book. It's what we learn from attending a class. And it can be conveyed. I can tell you 1 + 1 is 2. You learn it in a math class. It becomes a rule that you live by, and you just know one. That's explicit knowledge. We have shared it back and forth. Tacit knowledge can't be shared like that. This is one of the reasons why, by the way, side note, why experts make horrible teachers in most cases. Because most expertise is based on tacit knowledge. I just know what to do. And the example of that is, well, how did you know to do that? You see somebody behave brilliantly, right? And you're like, well, how did you know to do that? Or how did you know that was the right thing to say or do? And they're like, I don't know. I just knew. I just had a feeling. So tacit knowledge is what we call, instinct, intuition, little birdie told me, that kind of thing. That's tacit knowledge,
Got
right?
it.
And what's great about that is the research on tacit knowledge indicates that somewhere to the tune of 80+% of the decisions you make on a day-to-day basis are based on tacit knowledge, as opposed to explicit knowledge, which means a huge majority of what you do every day, you have no idea why you do it.
That makes sense.
And so
I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. What's fascinating about that? So that's why this is one of these meta skills is so important, because again, one of the things that we're seeing that contextually intelligent do more often, not that they're perfect at it either, they're not, but they're just higher frequency of behavior, is when they notice they're making a decision about something, they pause for a moment and ask themselves, why? Why am I doing this? Why is my instinct to behave this way or to say this thing? And again, this comes back to 3D thinking. If you see somebody hostile, you have an instinct to react negatively and to react in self-defense or emotional defense. And so you lash back, right? And then you maybe hurt the other person emotionally. And then you think, oh, I'm sorry. And you got, why? What was it in the past, in the background, in the hindsight piece that made you believe that facial expression or that whatever you're noticing warrants this response? Be aware of that. And that's what this idea of embracing or becoming aware of our tacit awareness is all about, is why am I reacting this way? So to do that, one of the strategies I have for that, and you've already suggested it's one of our challenges to your listeners, is 2 weeks of keeping the notepad. One of the other things that I do is I keep several notepads. I have legal pads everywhere. I'm one of those guys, and of what I call watershed moments in Matt Kutz's life, kind of thing. And every time I have one of these moments where I'm driving in the car, having a conversation, and I have an interesting memory that seems to come from nowhere about an event that happened, I write it down and go, what was it that whatever was said triggered that memory, triggered that response? And I go back and I explore those moments, explore those times. And I begin to and what happens after you do that for a while, you begin to construct kind of a scaffolding or a framework of why I am the way I am, and why I respond a certain way. Well, the reason why, when you get down, and it comes to a story, I don't have time, but this all came about from, again, a funny story I tell in the book. But I remember one particular day, I was 12-ish years old. I don't remember exactly how old I was, but I came home from school. I had a routine, dropping my book bag at the door and then going out, grabbing a snack in the kitchen and going out the back door in the alley. We lived in the city, so we didn't have a yard. We had an alley. Went out the alley to play stickball, with my friends. Mm-hmm. And this particular day, I was thinking I was going to do the same thing, and I didn't. My mom was waiting there at the door and said, "No, you're not playing ball today because you didn't do your chores before school this morning." So I'm being punished. I've got to do the extra chores, and then I've got to do the chores that I didn't do, and then I got the extra chores because I didn't do my, the punishment chores. So I'm upset, I can't, I'm important, people are waiting for me, kind of thing.
Yeah, right.
And, and so I get this attitude with my mom.
Oh, bad decision.
Yeah, exactly. And so talk about being aware of your context. I was not aware of the fact that my dad was home. He was never home, rarely home when I got home from school. So I didn't think to check the kitchen first before I reacted to my mother. So I start lipping off to my mom. I disrespect my mom. And my dad here on the other time, unbeknownst to me, is around the corner in the kitchen listening to the whole thing. In a matter of moments, my dad comes flying out of the kitchen as fast as he can, and he grabs me right here on the trap, the muscle there and the shoulder there, and that brachial plexus nerve. If it's a Vulcan death grip, if you're a Star Trek, if you know anything about Mr. Spock and the Vulcan death grip, he applied the Vulcan death grip. And so I'm there. He's got me in the Vulcan death grip. He walks me over to the wall, kind of pins me up against the wall. And he's calm. He's not angry. He's not violent or anything like that. He got me there, and my arms twitching. He's got me against the wall. He gets down right in my face and he says to me, he goes, "Don't you ever talk to my wife like that again."
Wow.
Now, what was profound about that, first time in my life, I actually remember, Bill, I'm not exaggerating. I actually remember thinking, his wife? Who's his wife?
I knew you were going to go there. Right? I don't know her as your wife.
Exactly. It's like, you know what? It's like, it never occurred to me that my mom and his wife were the same person.
Yeah.
I had only ever interacted with my mom as my mom. I never had the awareness. I never had anyway, so that was, my mind was blown. I'm thinking that, and he's trying to instruct me here and kind of, I'm trying to stay alive and not get in trouble. And I'm thinking about this, and he's trying to coach me. And then he says, my dad was a hilarious guy. And then he says, "If you ever do that again, we'll kill you. And no one will know you're gone because we can make another one that looks just like you."
Wow. Wow.
And so that's my dad.
That put the fear of God in you.
Yeah, he sure did. But so anyway, so then she tells me that. I missed that part until afterwards, because I'm still thinking, mom, wife. And then so later on, as I'm doing the chores, the makeup chores that I have to do, I remember sulking about it. I remember thinking, if it was because that really was profound for me. If it was my grandfather who was here and the situation played out the same way, he would have said, don't talk to my daughter like that. And if it was my uncle who was here and the situation played out the same way, he would have said, don't talk to my sister like that. All of a sudden, and this is a lot for a 12-year-old kid to handle. All of a sudden, my mind is expanded from this person who I only ever knew and related to and understood as mom is now sister, mother, daughter, friend. Wife. All these other things, and boom. And so anyway, all that to say this, the tacit part was 30 years later, someone walks into my office, a colleague of mine walks into my office and pays me a very nice compliment on my family and my kids and asked me, how can my family, I would like my family to be more like your family kind of thing. What tips do you have for me kind of a thing? And I didn't have an answer for him, and it was one of those things, well, I don't know, like that expert I was just talking about, well, I don't know, I'm just lucky, I guess. But then that bothered me, bothered him, and I started thinking about that, and I realized, no, there are moments that shaped this moment we're having now. And so going back, and I begin to remember, that's a moment of tacit insight, where I remembered, like, wait a second, that created something in me.
Yes.
And in this case, it was positive because we all have, this same thing works on the negative side of things as well.
Sure.
And in this case, this positive thing, but it created something in me because I remember all through high school and college later on, it's true. I hope I can convey the gravity of this, but I remember thinking, even as I'm dating and things like that, of whatever ends up happening, and if I get married and all these things, I want to make sure that I have that, my wife is my wife as much as she is a mom, kind of a thing. So I'm starting to look for a certain type of person. I wasn't even aware of it. I didn't even know it, but I'm actually kind of looking for a certain type of person, trying to build a certain type of connection and relationship where whoever I marry will understand that she's my wife as much as she is my mom, and she doesn't lose her wifeness to subjugate to her momness, and she doesn't lose her momness to her wifeness. I hope that's not silly, but that's what's going on in my head. I'm just explaining, the jumbling in the back of my head. Right. Yeah. But that's what tacit knowledge is. And it's there for all of us.
Yeah.
It's there, but we're just so unalert to it and unaware of it.
Sure.
So when we have these moments, that's what happens. So again, when we start thinking in these ways, it creates an opportunity for so many other skills to emerge. And these are the three, what I call, like I said, the foundational or central meta skills. And then from that, the contextual intelligence skills can emerge. But you got to think this way or become comfortable with this first.
Oh, Matt, you've given us a tremendous amount of stuff to think about. Better thinking leads to better decisions making. And I really appreciate you being here today. But as I try to draw a close to all of our interviews, you run an elevator, and it's going to be a 17-second ride, an elevator speech. What might be your elevator speech to guys out there, wrestling around with stuff in their heads at night? What might be a few words of encouragement or a little coaching line that you have for us?
So this is a great question, because this is the thing I think helps the most, and that's when somebody tells you something about how you made them feel. Believe it. We don't believe that, and just believe it. When you get a critical response, and I don't mean, like hatred, criticism. You need to deal with that differently. But when you get a genuinely honest, I'm not sure people understood what you meant, or when you do this, you say this or behave this way, it makes me feel like this. Then instead of making an excuse for it, which is what we do, I do it. Make an excuse for it. Well, the reason why I did that is because of this, or the reason, I didn't mean to do it like that. I didn't mean to come off that way. Okay, that's true too, but own the fact that you did something or said something that made them feel that way. And once we do that, it gives us permission to examine our own behavior, going back to thinking about your thinking while you're thinking. And that's really my message. And the bottom line, if anybody will ever ask me for advice, that's it. It's like, when somebody tells you something, don't argue with them about it. Believe that what they feel the way that they say they feel, and that you somehow had a part to play in that, for the good or the bad. And then it helps. It helps.
Well,
it just helps.
Sounds great. Sounds great. Matthew Kutz, thanks a million
Yeah.
for being here on Guy Shrink, and best wishes to you, and keep making us think better.
All right. Thanks,
Thanks,
I
man.
appreciate it.
Yeah,
This
you
has been a
bet.
blast.
Thanks.